let's take a quick recap of what we were doing. So the last part we were dealing with how the subject matter guides the students' learning. And as we said, under this you have two aspects which are important. So last time we dealt with the cognitive domain, and what was left was the affective domain. So what does the cognitive domain focus on? More on the intellectual it will focus more on acquiring knowledge and critical thinking. And so here the main aspect is on pieces of information which students are supposed to know, facts, details, etc. And therefore we see that the teaching method here, what we saw last time, was direct teaching in order to supply a particular specific information. Now today we'll take a look at the affective domain, which takes a look into what do we mean by affective? What comes under the affective domain? If thinking, intellectual skills, acquiring knowledge comes under the cognitive, what will come under the affective? Emotions, yes. Then feelings, okay. So attitudes, values, all this will come under the affective domain. So as we see that the affective domain will emphasize emotions, attitudes and values. Now why do you think that it is important for us also to look at this aspect of the personality? Okay, so first is because we want all round or holistic development. Any other reason why the affective domain is important? Okay, so that means yes, so you cannot only be stuck at one level, you also require other. For example, we see that there is a saying, now all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. That means you also need other leisure activities in order to relax and get back with the same vigor. Next we see that in today's world there is a lot of stress, right? So therefore we see that developing or giving importance to our emotions, attitudes, etc. is also required for stress management. Why? Otherwise we see that under pressure people tend to break down. Okay, so the term is cracking under pressure. Yes. Okay, also important in order to motivate etc. Secondly, we also see that for a good harmonious environment, we need to keep in mind values, attitudes, etc. Okay, so that is why the affective domain, especially in today's world, is given a lot of importance. Okay, because it helps the person to first and foremost get a holistic all-round training, and also it helps him to be able to better manage himself and also those who are there under him. Good intervention, yes. Others centered. So, yes, because in today's world, since we are so individualistic, only worried about our own selves, it also helps us to be other centered. So basically we see that the main components, okay, in the affective domain will be beliefs, which basically include our own convictions, or a particular kind of an acceptance that something is true or false. Okay, each one of us has our own set of beliefs. Okay, some are rational, some tend also to be non-rational. Okay, so for example, superstition also comes under belief, but we say that, okay, some may say that it is irrational, but also it depends from person to person. For example, sometimes we see that if you have done, some of them will have a particular pen, right, for exam, lucky pen or something. If they write with that itself, it helps. Others may have a particular set of clothes which they will wear for any particular important function. Okay, so these things in a way are beliefs or convictions that they have, that that particular thing will help them or be there. Next, values. So we see that values will involve principles as well as standards of behavior. How a person is supposed to behave in one situation when they go for a formal gathering, how a person behaves when he is with his friends, etc. Secondly, we also have certain principles in our lives, right? Certain things that we want to do and we will follow it by all means. And each one of us may have our own set of principles. Okay, for some it may be following a routine life, that could be one. For others it could be like be detailed about everything, attention to detail, etc. So these are all the values that we hold in life. And therefore these two play a very important role in the attitude that we develop on our personality and also in our dealings with others. So also in the decisions that we take, our attitude or our personality is revealed. So for example, if we tend to be conservative by nature, then even in the decisions we will not be willing to take the risk. Whereas sometimes if there are people who are daring, courageous, we see that they are willing to risk it in certain decisions. So we see that all these beliefs, values affect our personality, our dealings with others, not only at the peer level but also at work. Now, what are the teaching strategies which are used in order to help or develop this affective domain? So first and foremost, we see that attitude awareness. So what do we mean by attitude awareness is we try to get the students, or for that matter anybody with whom we are dealing with, we get them to recognize their attitude to a particular subject or a particular matter. So this can be done by asking questions, by having questionnaires, interviews, etc. For example, what is your view towards examinations in general? Okay, but when you hear exam, what exactly is your feeling? What exactly is your... Okay, let's take another term. When you hear about regency, what do you have in your mind? Okay, teaching, okay, marketing, then looking forward to... Okay, so we see that here each of you, okay, already have a particular preconceived idea or an attitude of what it is going to be. So therefore we see that this attitude awareness is very important, because if you are aware what you are already thinking about, okay, we see that then you are able to correct or remedy the attitude that you have. Because sometimes if you go with a negative attitude towards something, subconsciously in your dealings you tend to reveal that kind of attitude. And therefore we see that it is important to understand or know. So in a way what we would normally call as introspection, look inside and see what exactly is going. So next is transforming. So once you know what is your attitude or what is your disposition towards one particular element, then you go to transform. And here this basically involves reframing negative attitudes. And this is done, we create attitudes that are relevant and which help in engaging with others. So for example, if my attitude for regency is that it is only going to be work, I am going to be like a slave, everybody will say do this, do that, the whole disposition or the whole approach to which I start that year will be kind of a negative one. In the sense, you will always be like, okay, anybody calls you, they have called me for work. Okay, and therefore we see that sometimes it may also influence your response to the others. Because sometimes even though you may not be busy, but still you will have that kind of mental fatigue, because you are constantly thinking that, oh, this is a very stressful job. And therefore once you are aware of this, you reframe it by looking at what actually it is. Okay, you look at what you are given. Maybe people in the past may have had a different experience, but your experience will be unique. So this is how you reframe your negative attitudes into positive ones. And finally we see that value-based learning. So this would involve exploring one's values, one's talents, skills, and how this can be an asset for wherever you may be, whether in the workplace, whether in the community, at school, etc. Okay, and therefore this also will have a effect on learning as well as on performance. So therefore students are always encouraged to develop talents, develop skills, so that they are not only restricted to the bookish domain but also are able to move out and also able to engage with the others. Now a broad question to everyone: if you have to choose between, if you have to pick out any one of the domains, which one would you pick out? Okay, how many would agree for the cognitive domain? How many say cognitive domain is the domain that we should develop? Nobody? Affective? Okay, so we see that we have to balance between the cognitive and the affective domains. Why is this balance important? Jonathan? Why is it important to balance the two domains? Okay, integral growth is one thing. Next we see that if we only develop the cognitive domains, we will just become robots, just skilled workers to do something. On the other hand, if we only develop the affective domain, we see that person may not have the sufficient skills necessary to have a good livelihood. So therefore, integrating both domains are important, and therefore we see that the teaching strategies will also integrate these domains, including the cognitive and the affective components. Now we see that this is important for all-round development and also to help others to appreciate what they are doing. Because one of the main reasons for stress today is we always think that what we are doing is too difficult, what we are doing is not that satisfactory. It is only when we put ourselves in the shoes of the others that we realize that they also are in the same boat. So therefore we need to appreciate what we are doing, and therefore we see that integrating both these domains are also important. So another important aspect of balancing these two domains is creation of hypothesis. Okay, so what is a hypothesis? Okay, it is basically a kind of a statement that is put out to be tested. So we have certain assumptions and therefore we want to test them out. So for example, will water boil at 100 degrees? Okay, then you do the test and you get the results. So here in the similar case, we see that teachers can help the students to transform their beliefs, generalizations, into hypothesis. So you have a particular belief. For example, if I do this, then it may not help me. So then you test it. Okay, you take examples from others, you put it out in the world, and then you come to a conclusion whether it is beneficial or not. So in this way we see that both the personal values and beliefs are also developed, and at the same time the person is also able to develop their thinking abilities. Now we have seen the cognitive development as well as the affective development. What are the procedures that we will use in a classroom setup to develop both the domains? Any guesses? What can we use to develop both the domains? So we see that discussions. Any other? Punishments. Can you elaborate on that? Okay, so you mean, in other words, if there is no kind of punishment or reward, if there is no incentive for something, there is no effort. Okay? Field trips, but not picnics. Movies, doubtful, but I would say maybe educational videos or clips can be helpful, because practically in the movies we just tend to become a passive observer, okay, most of the times. So any other? Pura personalis. Okay. So first and foremost we see that when we want to develop the cognitive, so when we're looking at a balanced classroom setup, so you have to focus on these two, as we have already discussed. So we see that in the cognitive focused activities, we'll be dealing with lectures, directly giving facts, information, etc. Then you will also have certain problem solving exercises, and you will have assessments in order to check the progress of the student. So in other words, we say that there is the input, and then you also want to check the result, whether this particular input is effective enough or no. Next, when you look at the affective focused activities, as you all rightly said, class discussions, okay, because these discussions enable students to express their attitudes as well as values related to a particular subject matter, and therefore we see that this classroom discussion generally happens to be a safe space. Why? Because you are in this comfort of your own peers, with people who you know, and therefore in a way it helps you to kind of develop your attitudes and values. Next is reflection. Very often we see that reflection doesn't take place. Why? Because there is no time, or it is only about assimilation. So what do we reflect on? We reflect on the beliefs, values and attitudes that we hold. So now when we look for a combined approach, what do you think will matter? Now we have seen for affective focused activities are lectures, exercises, assessments, whereas for the affective focused you have class discussions, reflections. For if you want to combine these two, what kind of a model will you come up with? If you want to combine these two, where there is learning also taking place, and also at the same time where you have people beginning to speak out or feeling free or in their comfort zone. Okay, case studies, drama, somebody said. What about projects? Any other thing? Ignition pedagogical paradigm, yes, that is also there. In drama we also will see role play. Okay, where certain skill. Do you think debates are useful? Yes, debates can be useful. So as we see, when we want to have a combined approach, case studies help in a way because both the cognitive as well as the affective domains or skills are put to the test, because you have a real life situation and you already have certain knowledge what you have already learned about it. So in a way you are putting it into practice. Yes, educational tours, yes, because obviously you can see whatever, especially for architecture students and even arts etc., history and all, it does help. Okay, then we see that debates or role plays in a way combine again the facts with beliefs and values. And when we look at projects, once again we see it is research plus your area of interest. So therefore when you look at your dissertations, you see that it is not that a topic is assigned to you, but you pick out a topic based on your own interest, something that where you want to further develop or further learn something on. So now we take a look at something which is quite relevant, or which is the culmination of all what we have learned so far. Okay, so how to carry out, or what are the attitudes which people use to carry out their, or to use their own position. So first and foremost, we see that it is important to understand the behavior trend. So when we look at certain behaviors which are generally seen, you have basically two, that is authoritarian and you have the non-authoritarian approach. So basically now this will be the kind of the mindset of the person engaging. Okay, so now we have seen the domains. Now what is the attitude should be of the learner as well as the one who is imparting the knowledge. Okay, so therefore we see that these two approaches, authoritarian and non-authoritarian, will dictate which approach is being followed. Okay, so first let us deal with the authoritarian approach. So in this approach we see that only a single perspective is encouraged. So here we see that students are expected to take only one particular perspective or stance. So let's take for example the Indian independence movement. So how many perspectives, so is history a single perspective subject? No. Why? On what does it depend? On who is writing, right? So now when it comes to the Indian independence movement, what are the perspectives that we can have? Okay, one is a revolt. Any other? Non-violent. Okay. Any other? Can we say fight for rights? Failed attempt at sacrifices. Can we speak about division? Okay. So these are the various perspectives. There can be more also, but for a class let's focus on these. So these are the various perspectives that we can have for one particular aspect of history. Now for example, if there is a teacher, okay, for example Mr. Smith. Now he is teaching about the Indian independence movement, let's say in an ICSE school. So if he holds to one stance, okay, so let's say he holds only to the stance that it was a revolt against the British. Okay, that means the British were doing a lot of good. They developed the roads, they developed communication, etc., etc., and people revolted. We see that he will encourage the students to only hold to that view. That means the students will be kind of trained, or the whole lectures, the subject matter that is being taught will only focus on the revolt aspect. Other aspects will completely be erased off. Similarly, we also see that even when it comes to the assessment, whether it be exams, whether it be projects, whether it be kind of any dialogue or debates, only this position will be rewarded. If anybody holds a different position, okay, that will be punished or won't be rewarded, in other words. So therefore the students will be in a way forced to take that perspective. Now this as a result of it, we see that those who come out of that class will always come out with that particular perspective. So this is just one example. There can be many others which we see. So what are the characteristics here? First is, it is a structured environment. Everything is planned and the plan is followed in complete detail. So here we see that teacher is in control. Over the whole classroom and the learning process. So here there is only one correct answer. You cannot have any alternative views. So here we see that it is a teacher-centered method where the teacher is the source of knowledge as well as the final authority in the class. So anything subscribed to which is not what the teacher has said is not rewarded or even unnoticed. So what are the implications of this? What are the consequences of this approach? Okay, we see that creativity will suffer. What else can there be? Okay, less learning, less growth. Okay, so we see that here the focus is only on direct instruction. So that means you have to arrive at a particular destination only through the approach that I am giving you. Okay, so the right answer is only what has been taught in class or what the teacher thinks it to be right. So in this case we see that there is very little autonomy. So there is no scope for creativity, no scope for growth, no freedom to express oneself, to express one's attitudes or ideas, or no different or alternative perspectives. And therefore, as I said, the assessments are drawn to get one particular answer itself. Which one? Yeah, autonomy means the one who is in control there. So it is only in this way the students have no say in the matter. So in a way they have little freedom to explore, to question why is this like that, why it cannot be something else. Okay, for example, in the why do you say it is a revolt, why it cannot be a freedom struggle, why it cannot be a fight for rights, that autonomy, that freedom is not there. Okay, so just the opposite of this is the non-authoritarian approach, again which is student centered and which allows them to explore multiple perspectives. So just the opposite of the authoritarian approach. So this is more of an open-ended, and we see that this in a way helps creativity, growth, and also leads to a better formed individual. So we see that what are the characteristics? First is the classroom becomes a very flexible environment. Okay, so in this case there is more freedom given to the student to express himself or herself. Then there are multiple perspectives which are explored. You look at various viewpoints, various solutions. So therefore problem solving skills are emphasized. And most importantly, it is a student centered. That means the teacher is only the facilitator. So the teacher only is the one who is giving the directions. The student is the one who takes the effort to reach the destination. Rather than in the previous approach, it was like the teacher dragging you by the hand and taking you to the destination. Here it is, he only shows the way and then the student takes his or her own way. So therefore, there can be, to reach one particular goal, there can be various paths. So, and therefore we see that this leads to thinking creatively, having multiple solutions. You have the freedom to explore your topics of interest. And more importantly, it is a self-directed learning. So the student has the scope to develop the areas where he or she needs to develop. Okay, and therefore the assessment here will be projects, discussions, and reflections. Reflect on these two questions, and beginning of next class we will begin with this.